Welcome. In this video, we are going to have a look at a basic example of classes in C++.
So it says declare a class student with private attributes ID, first name, last name, program, cos1, cos2, cos3, and cos4. And then write appropriate setters and getters for the class. And then after that, in the main function, declare an object of the student and attempt to set the class attributes with your details. And then at the end, print the values of the object attributes. Now, so far, we have seen how to work with parallel arrays. So in one of the labs, we had this question on analyzing the grade or mark of the student. Now, in the first one, what we did was we created two separate parallel arrays, right? And then we used those two arrays to store the details of the students from the file. So the IDs array had the ID and the marks array had the marks. And then later on, we also found the grade using some formula and then printed the details. Now, for this one, you will notice that things are not really connected together. They are floating all around. And these two arrays, they are independent of each other. So in the following lab, what we did was we took these two details and converted them into a struct, right, called the student. Now this time the struct had the ID, mark, and we also included the grade. So instead of having a parallel array over here, we used the struct. So with the struct along with that comes the ID, mark, and grade. And then to use the struct, we declared a array of type student of some size, and then we used this struct to store the details from the file, very similar to the parallel array. But this time, whenever we declare an object of the type student, the ID, mark, and grade, they go together with the object. So what we have here in the struct is the attributes. Now to build on to this, we have something for this week, which is the class. Now the difference between a class and a struct at a very high level, a class will have the attributes similar to a structure, right? A structure has the attributes, but a class along with the attributes will also have some functions, and those functions are called the behavior of the class. So in the class, we have the attributes as well as some functions which can perform some operation on these attributes. So I'll open up my Visual Studio. I'll create a new project, empty project with C++. Next, I'll give the name as exercise 5, and I'll save it in my lab 4 folder. Create. And then once again, source files, right click, go to add and click on new item. Select C++ file, and I'll rename this to main.cpp. Add. So we have seen that to declare a struct, we are going to use the struct keyword, right, followed by the name of the struct, right? We will have some name, and then inside the curly braces, we are going to write the attributes. Now to declare a class, instead of using the struct keyword, we will use the class keyword and then the name of the class. So in our case, the name of the class is student, and then the student class has some private attributes. These attributes are ID, first name, last name, program, cos1 till 4. So we have string ID, string name, string program. This will be first name, and likewise we have the last name, and then we have cos1, then we have cos2, cos3, and cos4. So a structure will look very similar to a class, But for the class, you will have all of this under a access modifier called private. So the purpose of this private keyword is to hide all of those attributes from outside access. So if I write a particular attribute under the private access modifier, I will not be able to access these attributes outside of this class directly. So if I want to set the name or get the name of the student, then how do I access those details? Well, for that I will have to declare some functions which will go under the public access modifier. And as the name suggests, this will be public. So anything under this will be accessible outside of the class. Now in here I'll have some constructors and destructors. I will have the constructor, then we'll have the destructor, and then we'll have the setup functions, and then the getter functions. Now what is the purpose of a constructor? A constructor will prepare the object before we use it. So if there's anything we want to initialize or prepare some variables, that will go inside the constructor. Now the constructor is basically just a function, but this is a special kind of function. The name of this function will be the same name as the class, which is student. And the other thing is, this function will not have any return type. So we have seen that a function has some return type, void or int or string, right? But the constructor will not have any return type. Now for now we'll leave the function empty. So I'll just put a semicolon to indicate that the function does not do anything. And then we'll have the destructor. And opposite to what a constructor does, the destructor will destroy all the resources that was used by the object. And in front of this name, we will have this tilde symbol. You will find the symbol on the left of the number 1 key on your keyboard. And once again, this function is empty, so I'll just write a semicolon. Then we will have the setup functions. Now the purpose of the setup functions is to set the values of these attributes. So if I want to set the value of the ID, I will call this function. I will pass ID as the parameter, and then inside the function I will initialize this ID to the parameter that was passed in the function. So I can name the function as setID, and to set the ID I will have to pass a parameter. I can say string ID, and then inside the function I will say ID is equal to ID. Now over here we have some conflict. We have one ID over here as the parameter and the other ID in the attribute. Now the compiler might get confused as to which ID refers to which one. So it won't know whether this ID refers to the parameter one or to the one that is in the attributes. So we have to say that the first one is the one that is inside the class. So we can say this arrow ID, and this keyword refers to the ID that is inside this particular class. So we are saying get the ID from the parameter and set it to this ID, which is this ID over here in the class. Now since this function is just doing something and not returning anything, we will mark this function as void. And then in the similar way we will have other setup methods. So we can say set first name, we'll pass a first name, and inside this function we are going to set the first name. Then we have set last name, pass a last name, and inside this function we are going to set the last name. Then next we have program and the causes. So I can say void set program. I will pass the program as the parameter, and then this arrow program is equal to program. Then set cos1. In the parameter I will pass cos1, and then inside this function I will say this arrow cos1 is equal to cos1. Then likewise for cos2, 3 and 4. So I'll just copy this and edit. So we have cos1, then we have cos2, so these are my setter methods. Then in the same way I will have the getter methods. The getter functions will retain the value of the attribute. So if I want to get the ID, I will say get ID, and inside this function we are going to retain whatever the ID is for the object, this arrow ID. Now since this function is retaining a string, then we will mark this function as a string function, and then every other method will also retain string. So we'll have a string and get first name. Inside the function we are going to retain this first name. Then likewise for the last name. Then we have get program and retain this arrow program. Then we have the causes, so cause1, retain this arrow cause1, and likewise I'll copy this and edit the names for the other three causes. So these are all my setter and getter methods. You will see that there are many functions inside this class, and all of these functions do something with the attributes that we have inside the class. So you will see that a class has much more functions and attributes as compared to a structure. A structure only has the attributes, whereas a class has the attributes as well as the functions. And these functions are called behaviors of the class. So our class is ready. Now we can use the class. So just as for the structure, we use the name of the structure as the data type, and then the name of the variable or the object. In the similar way, we will do the same thing with the class. So we have the class name, and then we have the name of the object. Let's call this S1. And then for structures, we say S1.id is equal to some ID, right? But in here, we cannot use this because this is private. When I hover on this, it says over here, member ID is inaccessible because that ID is private. So how do I assign the value? Well, I will have to call the setter method, which is set ID, and inside this function as a parameter I will pass the ID. So we have set ID. Then in the similar way we can do set first name. Let's say the first name is Peter. Then we have set last name. We'll give some last name, right? And then we will set the program. Let's say Peter is doing BNS, and then we will set the causes. So we can say set cause1, maybe CS111. And in a similar way, I will call the other remaining methods of the set cause to set each of the causes. cos 1, 2, 3, and 4, maybe CS 111, CS 112, MI 111, and MI 112. So the causes and all the details are now set. How do I get the details to print? I can say cout s1 dot, this time get id to get the id, and then likewise I can access the other members as well. So I can say s1 dot get first name, then s1 dot get last name, then s1 dot get program, s1 dot get cause 1, s1 dot get cause 2, s1 dot get cause 3, and then s1 dot get cause 4. So now when I run this code, right, we get all the details back. So these were the details that we have set using the setup functions, and then to print or get the details we use the getter functions, and using that we are able to print those details back. Now I can also create an array of students. I can say students, very similar to what we had for the structures, maybe of size 10. And then to set the details at, let's say, index number 1, I can say students at index 0. So this is the first student, and for this one the details are as follows. Right, so if I run this code, right, we have the same thing back. In the similar way, I can set the details for the other students. Maybe we have another student and we'll call it maybe, or save it at index number 1. So students at index 1, and then we can set some details. Something like that. So now when I run this code, we get the details of both the students, and they are stored in the array. So you can use a for loop maybe to traverse the entire array, right? And then inside each array you can have students I dot set id or set name, and then likewise you can get the id, first name, last name, and every other detail. You can also store the details using the setup functions from a file. So read the details from a file and store them using the setup functions.
So that was all for this video. Thank you for watching.